Tonight we'll be hearing from Rachel Tabor Hamilton. I want to remind you of a few expectations for this evening so that we set the right tone as we start off. I want to remind you that she is our guest and we're not here to change her mind about anything. Um, she'll be talking for about 45 minutes. And so while she's talking, please hold your questions unless she opens the floor to questions at the time. After her talk, then she'll open it up for more free-form discussion, and then we can start asking questions. As we hear about other traditions, I urge you to remain open and non-judgmental. I remind you that we're here to learn from others. So during the discussion, stay open, and please take the opportunity to follow your honest curiosity deeper afterwards. I want to say a quick word about Rachel. She is the rector of Trinity Episcopal Church in Everett. She serves on the board of the Anglican Indigenous Network, which is a global network of leadership in the Anglican Communion for Indigenous people. The member nations of that network are Canada, Hawaii, United States, New Zealand, and Australia. She principal authored 3 times on reports to the Anglican Consultative Council and co-founder and coordinator for Ethnic Circles of Color, which is the network of people of color in our diocese. So to go cliche, without further ado, I introduce Rachel Tabor Hamilton.
Thank you, Darren, and thank you, Josh, for having me tonight. It really is an honor and a privilege to be able to be with you and have the opportunity to share around Indigenous traditions. I'll introduce myself in a traditional way. My Anglo name is Rachel. My Shakani name is Jambahate, and my Athabascan name is Kohoijina. And my people are from British Columbia through my mother's heritage. So I'm glad to be able to share that with you. Today, what I have prepared is sort of an orientation to kind of the cultures, rituals, and beliefs that accompany the death and dying process and the post-death process and memorial process. For me, it's really important to be able to share some of the ritual tradition and some of the belief system that really informs all of that, so that there's a context for you to understand how the beliefs and the ritual and the memorial all kind of relates to each other. So I'll kind of go through these things. I'm using some rather specific examples to North America, because that's probably most of your reference points for that, with the understanding that globally Indigenous people, of course, have their own rich traditional system around these same practices where they are. So let's see what I have for you. And first I need to put on my glasses before I can share my screen and actually read what I have for you. Thank you. All right, so some Indigenous perspectives on death and honoring. And I want to acknowledge the work of Ian Anderson, who I worked with as a partner up in Canada with education on end-of-life care for Indigenous people. Oops, excuse me. I need to just transition something here. It's not wanting, oh, there we go. So life and death in Indigenous worldview in general includes an understanding of who we are and whose we are within that belief system. And it's important for us to be connected to our traditional heritage, even if we've become Christian in our belief, because it's our Indigenous identity that informs us about where we come from. We accept and understand that each of us as Indigenous people have a particular destiny that Creator has laid out for us. And that our life, as we know it, is meant to be walked carefully within our systems of honor and value here on Mother Earth. We understand ourselves as primarily spiritual people having a human experience, rather than humans having a spiritual experience. context of our traditions around death and dying and memorialization are very much informed today, even by the story of the last 3 centuries. And I explored that with some of you who were able to participate in the presentation on Doctrine of Discovery. And that history is really shaped by an experience of generational survival and adaptations to hardship, deprivation, and really the minimizing and sometimes very much the oppression of our traditional expressions and beliefs. But traditional cultures have survived and they have evolved and adapted. And survival is an appropriate term, since that powerful combination of church, state, and economics led to the dispossession of lands and beliefs. So a lot of our death practices and beliefs are part of our recovery and restoration of our Indigenous identity. And it's important that Christians understand that even me as an Episcopal priest are bringing both the traditions of my Indigenous lifeways as well as the Christian tradition, and they co-partner in how I understand death and dying. And now to remind us that there's a huge diversity even in the United States. We have 527 recognized tribes. So when we talk about rituals of death and dying, you'll want to do your specific study around the people that you might be dealing with or encountering. So we will want to be careful not to generalize Indigenous people into a pan-Indian monoculture, even in the United States. So in the recognition that traditional beliefs have survived, we also recognize that Indigenous peoples have their own organized religion. They have their own way of life. And Christianity is the dominant religion in many Native communities. Aspects of traditional beliefs may be maintained while also respecting Christian ways. And in the Navajo Land Area Mission, we really see that tradition of the Episcopal Church and tradition of Navajo belief coming together in very powerful and meaningful ways within the funerary customs of Episcopal Native people. We want to reality check ourselves that when we're talking about Indigenous traditions of any kind, how traditional someone is not easily measured, and it's probably really best not to be measured by non-Native people. How traditional is an Indigenous person is really up to that individual to define. So we want to not assume a person is traditional because they're Indigenous. And we don't want to assume that a Christian Indigenous person will have the same attitudes towards death and dying that a European parishioner might. For Indigenous people, when we talk about death and dying and memorialization, in every single instance that I've ever encountered with Indigenous people, death is absolutely related to the creation story of that people. Because when we are talking about death and dying, we are orienting ourselves to where we came from, where we originated, and that will always bring us back to a creation story. Each tribe's or nation's creation story talks about how that people came into their place on Mother Earth. So creation stories are very much based in place, which is why being removed from place has had historically a very devastating spiritual impact, and how important it still is for many Indigenous people to be able to take back the cremains of their loved ones to their heritage lands. Because the creation stories for Indigenous people encode the original instructions of how to be on the earth, how we're to be with one another, how we're to be in relationship. And there are many ways in which those original instructions also dictate how we are to die and how we are to be memorialized. All of those creation stories, our creation story comes to bring that whole circle or cycle of life is really brought into the present in the dying process. So in order to understand death, we must first understand this cycle as Indigenous people understand it. And we have generally 4 stages that we understand as part of the journey of the human spirit, the spirit in human form. And it begins with birth. It has the experience of life, which leads to an experience of death, which is itself a lesson and an understanding that's shared as community. And then afterlife and our role, we understand that we have a role. Even in our afterlife, we have role in our communities. That is very important. We'll get to that. In life, in that understanding again that we are spirit beings having a human experience, we understand that each being is composed of 3 aspects or parts. That we are primarily to understand ourselves as spirit. We are also to understand ourselves as being informed by our mind. And in the Indigenous cosmology, a mind is more than your brain. The mind is how we also live together, how we are expressing our thoughts, our ideas, and our personhood into our life in the community. So to have a right mind is also inferring to be in right relationship with those around us and with Creator. And then of course the third part is body. So we don't separate those things one from another. When we're talking about body, we're also inferring the needs of the spirit and the needs of the mind, or of our presence in the world. So when Indigenous people are approached, or the way that we approach healing, for example, or medicine, and even in our dying process, we recognize the need to comfort the body, take care of the mind or the relationships and our presence in it, and to take care of the spirit. So as we are born, our spirit leaves the realm of the Creator or the spirit world. And in that spirit world, we had all kinds of access to the information that the spirit world has. We knew about the gifts of the spirit, we knew our gifts, we knew talents, we knew our destiny, we knew it all. But when we're born, we're separated from that knowledge and information. And the spirit enters a baby's body and life begins in that 4 stages of life. Because we don't remember anything that we had before. We spend our childhood and our youth, our adulthood, and our elder years all challenging ourselves to be finding the Creator in this life and to celebrate the Creator and be of service through the gifts that we have and that we discover throughout life. And all our gifts from Creator are meant to serve the community, are meant to serve humankind, and are meant to serve all of life that we encounter. In Indigenous cosmology, we understand that it isn't just humans that have spirit, but that spirit is given in every creature and also in the vegetation of the world, right? In trees and in the medicines of the plants. So all things have spirit, places have spirit, geography and geographical features have spirit. And we understand ourselves in spiritual relationship as least as much as in physical relationship to all that's around us in the natural world. So in that relationship with all of life around us, in our lives, we understand that we will be challenged. We are challenged. That's part of life. And we are taught that and enculturated in that from the earliest days. We understand from the earliest days that we will experience failures, and how we deal with those and what we are challenged to become out of those are part of our destiny or life journey. We're really challenged to confront our weaknesses and be honest about them, and to, when we've done wrong, to really own up to that, and to be taught by our community and our elders about how to correct ourselves, how to take responsibility for our action, and how to take action that contribute to the wellness of the community and to our lives. We embrace healing and spiritual training in very proactive ways that are very much a part of our life as breathing and eating and anything else. We are spiritually formed through things like medicine lodges or society lodges, and also, of course, through the daily ceremonies. Ceremony for Indigenous people isn't only something that might happen at weekly gatherings or special gatherings. That ceremonies are also a way of life every day, that we're really asked to give thanks in every moment of relationship, and to have what might be called in non-native culture a mindfulness about how we walk in the world and the impact that we have. And if we are choosing an impact that's going to have a larger ripple into the life of the community, to challenge it to be more healthy or well than it is, then we see that as medicine work. It's sacred work to move the community and to move people around us and to move ourselves into better relationship and to well relationship. The nature of spiritual training imprints the identity of the person throughout adulthood and our elder years. Ceremonies, individually and community-based, are extremely important in our way of life. The sacred nature of one's individual spirit is captured in those creation stories I mentioned earlier. The creation stories set a template that's very important for our relationship with Creator and the natural world, and our place in it and our responsibility to it. And also the creation stories always connect us to what has gone before, not only to Creator, but to ancestors. And our belief in that ancestors are watching us, are there to continue to give us wisdom, are there because they've lived their lives of destiny to assure that we would be. And so that legacy of relationships from the beginning of time to the present is something that we're asked and indoctrinated to walk with and formed to walk with in respect. Each of us are born with a spirit. We believe each of us are born also have a sacred name. And in Indigenous cultures, it's not unusual to have several names. There can be a sacred name that we are given or come to understand through spiritual journey. There can be a name that's given to us as a kind of a nickname that people would use as when we're children. When we come into adulthood, we might have a formal naming ceremony where we're given our social name. And we might belong to a medicine lodge or another society lodge and be gifted with an ancestral name that we're to carry and live into. So lots of names, but the sacred name is the one that we usually don't speak or share until we are actually going to die. We also are born into a clan or a familial relationship, as well as a nation, an Indigenous national identity. So when I say I am Shakan First Nation and talk about tribal clans, that's can be part of traditional introduction. And then also we are born with gifts and talents that the community, and especially elders, play an important role as we grow in identifying with us and in calling forth from us. And in that way, we understand that we each have a destiny in which we'll face those challenges and be nurtured and cultivated by our community. In end-of-life ceremonies, one of the things, whenever Indigenous people refer to ceremony or refer to healing herbs or any of that, or sacred places, all of that for us is medicine. And sometimes in non-native culture, medicine just gets confined to the stuff you buy over the counter or that your doctor prescribes for you. And we see medicine just as being part of the world that we're walking through. But in ceremony, we're particularly using medicine in a way that is intentional, and it reflects the traditional person's name, clan, nation, accomplishments. It can be very individualized to the person and informed by what they belong to within the Indigenous community. And again, going back to our creation story, our sense of identity from that, our origins help us understand our purpose on Earth and our eventual destination when our spirits leave Mother Earth. We take our relationships, our social relationships, and our spiritual relationships with us. And we believe that we still have work that Creator has for us to do when we leave Earth. When in a dying process, a traditional Indigenous person will call for those ceremonies as a really needful part of that dying process. They'll call for medicine, they'll call for prayers, and the belief generally is that prayers often include songs and drumming, and that this will help guide us back to the spirit world from whence we came. This will often involve a spiritual leader or a medicine person close to the dying person who will conduct the ceremonies. And sometimes if that person isn't available, then another leader in the community, a chief who might be available, or an elder in the family can lead these ceremonies also. And when those rituals are happening, just like life, dying is not supposed to happen alone. It's a community and family moment and process, and family and clan members, and even medicine lodge members, people who are close to that person are really expected and welcome to be present in that dying process. And they are part of the medicine that is happening for the dying person. And in this context, it means spiritual power, and in some cases that can only be present when the community is present. It's a combination of the ability of the leaders who are there and the authority that they have to be calling upon Creator and to be guiding the person in the dying process. So more about these ceremonies. Nature and the practice of ceremonies varies from community to community as well as from tribe to tribe. They can be very particular even to a clan or to a family. And the one described in this presentation is a little bit of a prototype that I've amalgamated together, the person who might lead these ceremonies. Many ceremonies are specific, as I said, even to the spiritual leader who might be being asked to lead ceremony. And usually what will happen is that spiritual leader will instruct the family or those present, or even the person in dying process. They'll instruct them what they need to do or what they'll be asked to do as part of holding the ceremony. And that spiritual leader, he or she has earned the gift and the right to perform particular ceremonies. Later on, we'll talk about pipe carriers, and only someone who has been entrusted as a formal pipe carrier within their community has the right to do pipe ceremony, for example. Again, our belief is that all medicine has its own spirit, and we are in communication and relationship with that spirit. A medicine bundle containing a pipe and other sacred items can be brought to the bedside of the dying person. That might contain sacred tobacco and offerings of food and cloth that are essential to the ceremony. Sometimes if food or cloth are involved in those ceremonies, they might be consumed by the people who are gathered, and they might be ritually shared with the person in the bed, or at least offered as part of the communal process of the dying person. And that patient or person in the bed is given the opportunity to repent or make right his relationship with Creator, his relationship with community, with family, with people who are around him. Because the whole intent is to help this person get to a place of peace, because only from a peaceful state or a state of right mind in relationship with all else can the person die correctly and go on the journey that they need to go on. And everyone who's gathered prays to the Creator for the safe passage of the spirit person to the spirit world. Ancestors who are not in the room are even invited to help guide that spirit in its travels. So the role of community and family are extremely important throughout this whole process, as they have been in life. And sacred medicines are burned like sage, sweetgrass, cedar, and tobacco are among the most common in North America to purify the dying person as well as all those present. And by purification, we don't mean to imply that someone is contaminated, but again, it's about bringing us to the right mind and full presence to one another. Family members may burn the food and the cloth offerings. And if they do that, if it's in a hospital setting, if they're in luck, the hospital will provide the opportunity for that. If they're not, they'll have to go do that at home or in the tribal area. Family, clan, and friends will hold a vigil to bring comfort, prayer, and ease the pain until the spirit leaves the body and begins its journey back to where it came from. And sacred songs and drumming are done, and family members have the opportunity to speak to the dying person, to share messages of gratitude, to share messages of love, to bring that person to a sense of peace and right relationship and comfort. And the pipe in many of the tribes, both in Canada and the United States, can play a large role in many tribes and many customs. And just to share with you, the pipe breaks down into lots of symbols itself. And for example, the bowl representing the woman or female element of the community, and the stem representing the man. And when these are joined together, because the pipe is literally assembled for the ceremony, that's where the belief is that life unfolds. So pipe ceremonies are about resurrection. They're about renewal. They're about recognizing birth and rebirth. And sacred tobacco, not just anything, but tobacco that has been raised a certain way, cultivated a certain way, and blessed, is smoked in the pipe. This isn't social tobacco. It's prepared and used in a particular way. And it's not uncommon for a lot of Indigenous people to carry tobacco, sacred tobacco, with them as part of daily devotions. Each time the pipe is raised, anytime someone raises it up and is used in ceremony, it's held very carefully, very particularly, and it's recognized as a celebration of life and a celebration of all creation. And it helps orient the dying person and the people who are grieving into all of creation. It takes them out of that particular moment and connects them to the cosmos. And in that prayer form, the Creator's guidance is requested, guidance for the family and the gathered community, and guidance for the person in the bed, that they might be guided to where they need to go, and the survivors guided in their life. Messages received through the pipe ceremony are permitted to be shared as part of the communal experience of comfort. And the most sacred tool of many Indigenous North American cultures is the pipe. It should never be denigrated, never talked down about, never understood as simply a way to smoke. This is very sacred, and people who are gifted and appointed as pipe carriers are seen as sacred people. And also I would share with you that our diocese does happen to have an Episcopal pipe carrier, and that would be Darren Chittister, who is at St. John's Olympia. Preparing for death, then, the dying person needs privacy with a spiritual leader, either alone or with family present. They definitely need that time for orientation in the process that's happening. And there are these ceremonies we've talked about. And in those ceremonies, the dying person is hearing messages about the love of Creator for them, the nature of the spirit world that they're returning to, and the beauty of the transition of the spirit from the physical back to the spiritual world. They're getting encouragement and strength and support from the sacred ceremony leader and from the family. And they're hearing remembrances and stories about life. They're hearing dreams that people have had. Often visions are shared, and fears are shared only so that they can be comforted and right relationship restored. Any regrets and guilt are listened to by the spiritual leader. as part of the healing process of the person in the bed, as part of the medicine that they need. And the dying person's mind, then the whole point is to clear them of any kind of negative feeling in body, mind, or spirit through prayer, through smudging. And smudging is the action of bringing smoke from sacred herbs onto the person and into the community that's gathered. And the pipe ceremonies might be part of it, and the sacred songs, so that with a good mind, that person in the bed can receive all of this teaching, all this profound orientation about their journey, and be fully prepared for that spiritual journey. Part of a lot of these rituals can include, it's very important for many to have a sacred fire burning outside of the home. Families perform lots of supportive ceremonies at a sacred fire. Once you build a sacred fire, it cannot be left unattended, because it represents the presence of the community and people who love the person who's dying or who has just died. And it's an honor to be someone on the rotation of people who companion the sacred fire. It needs to be continually cared for as one would care for their loved ones. And families perform lots of ceremonies there in that sacred fire. They can do some of that offering that we talked about with cloth or with food. They can do purification rites for themselves that help them release and express their grief. And they can also call upon the ancestors that have gone before to be present to them and help normalize that cycle of life that they're experiencing. So sacred fire, like the pipe, is a very special ceremonial tool, and it can be central to the practice of ceremony. It can be a source of communication with the Creator, with all the spirits upon which we rely in life, and the spirits of ancestors, the spirits of warriors, and those who all bring the will of Creator to heal, to teach, correct, protect human beings on earth in this world. And the idea is also that the people who are dying can carry the prayers of the family to Creator. Visions, answers and guidance flow from the fire into the people, and it's a way of just connecting and, again, taking people beyond just the moment of what's happening and putting this moment and this experience of a dying person and a dying loved one into the sense of the greater wholeness of creation and the natural cycle of birth, life, death, rebirth, back to the place from whence we've come. And offerings of tobacco, food, cloth, all about requesting the safe journey of the spirit to the spirit world. At the time of death, we believe that our original mother, Mother Earth, who nourished our bodies during life, will now reclaim our physical form so that it can continue to nourish other life. And that's part of the natural cycle as well. And we believe our original Father, Creator, takes then our spirit to return them to their place of origin. So an afterlife, again, it's this belief can be particular from tradition to tradition, tribe to tribe. But there is a universal sense that the spirit can be felt or seen leaving the body. And I can share with you, I've had that experience while holding my father during his death process. We believe that it travels west. We associate the East with rituals of birth and the West with ancestors and rituals of dying. And we see them passing from East to West as they go to the spirit world. And depending on where you are geographically, where they're headed, we believe that it ascends to its highest place or the brightest light in the sky, to the place where loved ones wait to embrace it and welcome it home. We also believe that spirits retain their identity and their sense of connection to family, and that those spirits live forever. And it takes its place in the spirit world according to the deeds and family membership and everything that it did and completed on the earth. And therefore the cycle of life is complete when the spirit returns to its place of origin. About the creator, we don't assign the gender, and sometimes we see it as incorporating all traits. We do see the creator as powerful, all loving, and all knowing, as holding all power, as responsible for all medicine and all wisdom. And we believe we are aided in the creator's work through our ancestors, through our warriors, men and women, and two-spirit people who've walked before us. And spirit beings are often referred to as grandmothers and grandfathers. When we hear some people talking about my grandmothers and grandfathers, we don't just mean our family lineage. We mean like all of them. Everybody's all together. Sometimes families can participate in sweat lodge or purification lodge as part of their grief recovery process. And we believe that the lodge and the medicine rituals associated with it are gifts from Creator that allow people to let go of everything in body, mind, and spirit that harms them and keeps them in a place of sadness, grief, unright action, to heal them in the presence of the Creator's power and love. That healing can feel very emotional. It can be emotional healing, physical healing, mental healing, spiritual healing. So many families have their own prayer lodges or sweat lodges. Many tribes have separate lodges for men and women. And then there are some places where families or all men, women, and children can gather for a particular collective purpose. And lodge will be a family prayer sweat when you're grieving the death of a loved one, and family members will use that time to pray together, to let go of negative feelings that they may not have resolved with the person who has died, or even negative feelings they have about the death. They gather strength from each other and make prayers and offerings on behalf for the dying person. If the person has passed already to the spirit world, the sweat lodge is called a journey or travel sweat, so a journey sweat. And again, into this comes that ancestral pipe bundle. Using the pipe in a particular way to honor the ancestors is to raise the pipe and offer it first into the direction of the west as an offering to the ancestors and the person who's traveled to the spirit world. And the sacred bundle is used to communicate with Creator, with Mother Earth, and with spirits of ancestors. And in this instance, the ancestral pipe will have a bowl that is black, which represents this world, as well as the feminine, and a stem that is white, that represents the spirit world, or the masculine. When used, there must be food and tobacco and cloth offerings as well that are part of that ritual. Usually there's also that ancestral fire present from which the bowl is lit, similar to a sacred fire, but with some changes that accompanies the use of a pipe. So preparing the family for the death of a loved one, the spiritual leader brings the medicine bundle to the family meeting, and they'll listen to the family's fears, worries, and dreams and visions, and they'll provide that understanding, again, of the cycle of life that's in the belief system of death, afterlife, spirit world. They'll connect them to their cosmology of belief. They'll encourage and support the family to get into that positive or good mind to help relieve their suffering. And whether at home or in the hospital, the ceremonials help the grieving family also make their own journey from anger, fear, guilt, or remorse to expressions of love and acceptance of what's happening and of peace. Pipe ceremonies, medicine songs, smudging, offerings, all of it help strengthen the family and increase their ability to provide mutual support. Children are always included in these rituals. Family ceremonies after death usually will be held within the 24 hours of that death, and they'll hold that sacred fire for 24 hours, always having it accompanied. Someone is always there, and they might do that for a while as an annual ritual on the birthday of that person. It helps family members, especially children, to understand that they are the most recent beings in a long line of ancestors that go back to the beginning of time when Creator placed the first man and woman on earth. Also, annually, there can be a death feast. Many tribes have a day, usually in the spring. In Western culture, it kind of happens in the fall, late October, early November. But for a lot of Native tribes, it'll happen in the spring, along with the whole resurrection of creation. The death feast is a celebration of people who have returned to the spirit world. It calls upon them, it remembers them. And the healing ceremonies might be used with all of these things we've talked about. It's ongoing work to heal spirits in the hearts of family members. Again, people might have in that time received sacred messages of comfort or courage from their pipe ceremonies, and Creator-filled messages to them in lodge gatherings. And it's all really meant to help lift grief from the heart or confusion and to help people heal. So the whole role of ceremonies that I'm stressing here is that how important those ceremonies are in the life of family, friends, and clans, and to help people let go of the spirit of the person who has transitioned into back to the spirit world. And if the grieving cycle is not complete, and the belief is if it's not complete, if people haven't done their grieving, it's so important that that grieving person may walk through life emotionally wounded and mentally challenged. So all these ceremonies and the intentionality about walking with people in a grieving process are really about helping them heal and get back to right mind as well. In several cultures there in North America, there's the practice of a ghost dance, and that can be the expression of that annual ceremony. But ghost dance, rather than being in spring, in some tribes, then would be held in the fall. Usually it's done after all the leaves are gone. It's conducted at a full moon for 4 nights after sunset to sunrise, all night long of dancing and fasting. And it is a communal celebration of all ancestors. It can include those offerings of cloth, tobacco, foods, and it's that thanksgiving for the ancestors for their prayers for people in this world, the guidance that they continue to provide through vision and medicine, and to show them that the ancestors are remembered and that people still do their best to honor them and live in the sacred way that they taught. The ghost dance is also an important communal gathering time. Teachings by elders are often shared. Spiritual leaders each evening will recall ancestral lineages and significant stories that help ground people in history and identity, and the understanding that we are the sum total of all our ancestors that have gone before, and that we walk in the journey that they have prepared for us. It's a powerful tool, the ghost dance, to assist those who are still grieving, and many spirits are said to visit the lodge to provide answers to grieving hearts. The funeral itself, going back after the death of a person, they can be directed. It's not like in dominant culture. Sometimes, it's really like, nope, these are the people who are supposed to lead funerals. In Indigenous country, they can kind of be led by an appointed person from family, clan, or a medicine person. And usually fasting can happen anywhere from 4 to 10 days. It kind of depends, or even how the ceremonies last, how long those last. Can be 4 to 10 days. And people hold awake for the deceased person in the home, and sacred songs are sung. In Navajo land, we had the death of Deacon Terry Starr, which was very sudden. When he was at seminary, he was in his 3rd year at seminary when he died very unexpectedly. And they did a 4-day ceremony for him. And the whole time people companioned him and were with him, and they held sacred fire outside as well. And the funeral ceremonies are conducted usually by elders or spiritual leaders. And again, this is all happening. A funeral happens in the context of the creation story, reminding us that the spirit has gone back to the spirit world. and defining the relationship again for all of us of our dependence on Mother Earth, and also our reliance on the ancestors that have gone before for the walk in this life. And that humans have a relationship with both spheres. This particular outline right here is really reflective of a Haudenosaunee, or the Iroquois creation spirituality. Because in the Haudenosaunee, when a person dies, there are spirit forces at work that want to disrupt that long spiritual journey. They believe in two realms, the earth realm where we live and the sky world where sacred beings are. And that they believe that the person who died, their spirit is ascending back to sky world, but that there's these trickster spirits that can get in their way. But that they also believe that the dead have power, and we want, and in the Haudenosaunee worldview, they want them to go as fast as possible and not hang around. So a lot of that ritual is oriented toward getting them where they're supposed to go. In the Ojibwe ceremonies, there is again kind of a concern about the lingering spirits of the dead, and they're willing to tolerate them hanging around for a little while. They expect them to hang around for at least a day or to 1 or 4 days, and they'll have annual ceremonies to appease them, please them. If they're still hanging around, they didn't make their journey. So the spirits of all the dead Native Americans from all Turtle Island. Turtle Island is all North America and South America is how we refer to the Americas. So we believe that the breath is taken for its journey, that it can take a while for that journey to be made, and that ceremonies are really all about helping the person make that journey. So the soul has its own destiny after life. It doesn't get to just go on vacation. We believe the soul is different from a life spirit that makes the body alive or animates it, and that inner force is given to the body by Creator, that the first breath of Creator brought first life, and as long as we breathe, we have life force in us. And so when we die, that life force or soul leaves the body, and in some traditions, it's believed it can linger around for a while and requires feast and honoring to go up to spirit world, or in the case of the Haudenosaunee, to sky world. And it's the belief about the spirit or the soul is that it's kind of vapor or doesn't have substance. That's why the belief is it can be seen by some, and that it retains its personal identity. And also, the medicine people teach us that the spirit can leave the body while the person is still alive and go visiting to collect spiritual knowledge. So those people who have those kinds of visions are usually identified pretty early on in their lives as medicine people. And this knowledge is revealed to the person in the form of dreams. In the House of Souls, in the Ojibwe tradition, that's where people come from and return to. And each soul is believed to have its own path leading from that soul house to the body, known as the Great Road or the Milky Way. Another sky path exists for evil souls and leads to a place halfway between. And those dead have the power to affect the living. So in the Ojibwe cosmology, there's sort of this in between where people can kind of get stuck and cause problems for the living. So mourning then in these indigenous traditions can include the family, it can include clans. There are some cultures like the Tlingit who have a moiety. So what that basically means is the clans are related to each other in two halves, and they're not supposed to marry within their moiety. They have to marry someone from the other moiety. In the case of Tlingit, it's Eagle and Raven. And our friend Becky Clark, who is here in this diocese, is Raven Clan. And so when someone in her family dies, it's the opposite clan that holds a ceremony of comfort for them and does all the funeral rituals and holds potlatch and offerings of food and gifts from the deceased person to family. And that's kind of also how the other clan thanks the other one for their hospitality. The one thing I would say is if you are ever with Indigenous people when someone has died, it is fairly traditional not to mention the name of that person who died, because you want to help the family let go, and mentioning their name can call that spirit back or cause fresh grief to come. So we often will talk about the person who in your family who died, or the man who just passed away, or your grandmother who passed away. And we call them by the relationship so they know who we're talking about. But we would never refer to a dead person on a bed or in a coffin as the body, because it's still a person. We just wouldn't mention them by name. So for us, death is not an end of life, but the beginning of another journey for the spirit, a journey in which they become an ancestor. And that role is considered extremely noble, because the generations are grateful for the role that ancestors played, and the wisdom and teachings of those who died are passed along in the culture, in clans, in families. And the ancestor may continue to visit those who follow to bring messages and guidance through visions and dreams. So that spirit needs to go to be with ancestors and become an ancestor. And even in the same way, it's important for the living to let go, and so that they can go on and move on. And so finally, I end with the way that prayers keep us connected to our loved ones, to our ancestors throughout life and throughout generations. And what you're seeing here are pictures of what are prayer bundles. And they're just little bundles that are filled with various sacred herbs, depending on the tribe or people. But it's something that is fairly common among a lot of Indigenous people in North America. And one of the teachings that I have from an elder is to tie up prayer bundles up to the trees. The trees are sort of representing that messenger role from this earth to the spirit world. And when the bundles naturally drop off, that's when our grief should be done. We should have gone through our healthy grieving process. And that's a message to us from our ancestor that it is time for us to move on. So they can be filled with sage, cedar, sweetgrass, tobacco, and they are the physical representation of our prayer. And sometimes the color can have different meanings, with red being the color most often associated with ancestors, even though in many tribes it represents the east, and black is what represents the west. So it just depends on what tribe and what colors you're associating with the directional cardinal points. So I'd like to ask if you have any comments or questions about anything I've shared, or any observations that you may have had with encounters with Indigenous nations that you know.
I've got quite a few questions. I gravitate towards the stuff that helps me be more polite. So I'd like to investigate something I noticed at the beginning. I thought you made a great statement. You said, don't assume a person is traditional because they are Indigenous. So I would like advice on a polite way to investigate. I don't know what the word is. Like, when someone introduces themselves to me as Indigenous, how can I open up more conversation about that politely?
Well, I think it will really depend on your degree of relationship to that person. For Native people, we're really taught to not talk a lot about our spirit life and our ritual. And there's a lot of reasons for that, partly because it's sacred. And so we don't just throw sacred conversation around. We don't treat those things lightly. And we're taught that there are specific occasions and contexts and times to talk about those things. So that's one thing. A Native person might not be sharing that with you, not because they don't trust you, but because they're not supposed to. and so the other thing is that trust issue. For a lot of Native people, especially in the 60s to 70s, there was just really gratuitous sharing and appropriation of Native cultures by non-Native people as part of their own quest to become their spiritual journey that they suddenly decided they need to have. So that appropriation can cause a lot of distrust as well. And the question could be, why do you want to know? That kind of thing, the fear of appropriation. So I would, not really bring up Indigenous belief or spirituality until and unless it's someone that you really know well, or they're willing to talk about it. Coming to a presentation like this, or lectures that are offered by Tulalip or Snow Home, all of those can be really helpful to be able to get a foot in the door and have the opportunity to ask those kinds of questions. But if you know someone well, if you are ever invited to a sweat lodge, there's an etiquette for that. And never decline a sweat lodge, even if you have heart problems. You can tell them that later, that, hey, I want to participate in this, but how can I do this? Because I have these kind of medical issues. But it's a real honor to be invited in that level of ritual. If you're invited to smoke pipe, there is a polite way to decline the pipe, but also honor it. So you want to ask your host about that before you even start it or in it, about how would I engage this in a way that's respectful. And an Indigenous person is never going to ever, like, dominant culture has a tendency in the pedagogy of teaching to make students, or children or adults, feel stupid if they don't know something. But in the Indigenous world, that humility is the first thing that has to happen, even with Indigenous children or other Indigenous people. That humility is huge. So if you just say, I don't know, and I don't want to be offensive, and I don't want to do anything that will cause harm, so please tell me what to do. That approach is really quite helpful. Did I answer your question? Have any of you ever been? Yeah, Josh?
I see Sean's hand up.
Okay, Sean.
Sean, go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, I had a quick question. My dad wasn't raised, I don't know what the term would be, like, with tribal traditions. He was a member of the Cowlitz tribe.
Okay. Yeah.
And there isn't anybody in his family that, I guess, I don't know what the word is, but followed any traditions. And so I've never been able to ask anybody what I can do. He wasn't my biological father. So I just was wondering, what can I do to honor him in a way that would be good for, I guess, like his, yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to ask that question.
No,
Is there something that I can do? I mean, he's passed on, I guess, like, for what, 20 years ago, but I've always kind of wanted to do something that would honor him and his ancestry.
No, I appreciate that question hugely. What you've named is a very common difficulty for a lot of Indigenous people, is we've been, for various reasons, separated from the opportunity to learn tradition. And often it's referred to as the right way or the good way to do a thing. And so one of the things that I would encourage you to do is, there are two things. First of all, the Burke Museum is an excellent educational resource for Western Washington tribal customs. And just even going there that's an educational setting already. And so inquiring about things like that would be very natural and very appropriate. So speaking with someone there about Khalid's specific customs of honoring ancestors could be really helpful to you. And you could do it without offending anybody, risking that. Another thing to do is they're just in general offering prayers through the burning of sacred herbs is a good way and a very appropriate way to honor someone and hold them intentionally. If you wanted something that was more like a memorial in perpetuity, you would definitely want to talk with the tribe about what would be an appropriate way to honor your father, and share with them that he did not have the opportunity to learn traditional ways, but that you seek to honor that in him. Oftentimes, every tribe has what they call an elder center, or, it's basically I don't know, YMCA, where elders hang out and get food. and that can be volunteering in that as a volunteer, just to help feed them and do things. There is another way to get to meet elders that you can ask those questions of.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I just saw Jane's hand.
Yeah, Rachel, I'd like to hear more about sweat lodges, because are they only used when someone has passed away, or are there other ceremonies that they're used for?
Thank you. Yes, sweat lodge is used for all kinds of rituals and reasons. If you think about it a little bit, like a mikvah, right? A Jewish mikvah, a ritual bath to help cleanse one spiritually, or put one in a right relationship with God after an event that maybe puts you off balance, right? Any transition that we experience in life is enough for us to maybe go and need a bit of a sweat lodge. So women who have given birth might have one sometime down the road after a birth, just check balance. People who are recovering from illness and who can tolerate sweat lodge without further harm, that can often be a way of giving thanks and a way of strengthening the spirit. A person who is thinking about making a critical life decision, like should they move, what should they study, what should they do about a difficult situation, they may go into a sweat. For example, when I was contacted by the Diocese of Olympia and told that they had signed me up to take my general ordination exam, but they didn't tell me that until 3 weeks before it was supposed to happen. And so the very first thing I did is I did a sweat lodge to get myself prepared to even do the study that I needed to do to refresh my mind so that I could do the GOE. So, it's just, I experience it as a time of like either spiritual crisis or spiritual need. That's the time to do a sweat. And definitely experiencing the death of a loved one is a spiritual crisis, and it's appropriate to do a sweat.
Sure, thank you.
Bruce.
My wife and I worked in an area of Africa where there was a belief, traditional belief, that the spirits of the ancestors were present. They had a name for them, Mazimu, and they would offer sacrifices. And if something was going wrong, they would often attribute to that because ancestors were angry. They had not sacrificed to them or offered them, there was a volcanic eruption and it was ruining their crops and so on because they have volcanoes in that area. Or it could be on any kind of a problem. Or of course it could be positive too. We're honoring them and we're doing well and our ancestors are really happy with us and so on. Is there some kind of thinking, I kind of picked up a little bit of that, but maybe I wasn't understanding correctly.
No, yeah, and again, it depends on that particular tribal set of beliefs or cosmology as to the power that ancestors have and whether that power is benevolent or back and forth on that, so and it depends, like we said in the Iroquois, or excuse me, in the Ojibwe, there are some spirits that kind of get stuck in that, and then they do get kind of malevolent. But in other traditions, my tradition is one that ancestors are benign, and what we're trying to do on earth in their dying processes, get them where they need to go. We're doing our healing work so that we can move on as well. And the relationship we have with them is very benevolent. And when they've gone on, we can continue to ask them for advice that can be given to us in dreams and visions. So it definitely does depend.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Christopher.
Yes, Rachel, this is fascinating. As an Episcopal priest yourself and an Indigenous person, we have this term unction, being with the dying. So how does the concept of the spirit being surrounded by family, not dying alone, and much of what you've shared with us, which is fascinating, how does that relate to unction? And since we are all God's children, aren't we all in this together?
With regard to the intentionality of the ritual of the sacrament of the sick that's used for a person in the dying process, that unction, in many ways that does exactly a parallel kind of ministry to the family and to the dying, as would the drumming and the singing and the pipe ritual. Everything is really oriented toward the same goal in both of those rituals, which is to bring the person into a sense of peace and relationship with God and a reminder of God's grace and presence. It's done, of course, contextually differently. I think that the Indigenous culture definitely emphasizes community and a communal experience much more than sort of and I'm generalizing horribly and I mean no offense, but compared to Indigenous ways, dominant culture ways are very individualistically oriented. And it tends to think about the needs of the individual rather than the needs of the family system or the social system, which can kind of really leave out people who also need to be part of that whole ritual of leave taking. So, and sometimes you can't help it. The circumstances are such that, like right now with COVID-19, family, community, it's very devastating to Indigenous people to not be able to be with their loved ones in that process. It's just contributing to trauma. So, and it's hard enough for dominant culture people. So I would say to you that there are parallel processes trying to achieve similar ends. And I see nothing discrepant about, my beliefs as an Indigenous person versus my beliefs as a Christian Episcopal priest. And I do think it can be much more community oriented than maybe some of our rituals are. We're really great at Eucharist and communion. We need to bring that sense into all of our rituals.
Thanks so much.
Darren.
Okay, for how long after death should I not say a person's name?
Thank you. In my tradition, it is exactly a year and a day. In my tradition, we refer to father, and when my father died, it was your father. It wasn't Julian. And in a year and a day after is when we actually did his internment. And the same for my mother. We had the cremains, we kept them near to us. But we didn't say the name. We didn't even look at where those were, we just had them and did prayers, etc. And then on the day of internment, we named that person and then they were put to rest with ritual. So it kind of depends a little bit. And we have a person, Elsie Dennis, in the diocese who's Shuswap, and she and I are actually cousins several generations back from British Columbia. And her son, Jamie, commit suicide. So in taking his life, it was imperative in her healing process that we continue to use his name, which was very different from usual ways of doing that. But she needed to hear his name as part of her integrating process. But I would note that it has been very, very hard for her, that it is now 6 years out. And it's as though he just still died.
Jenny? Jenny, for some reason, I can't hear you. You're unmuted, but I can't hear you. I don't know why. You might try using the chat instead. I can't hear a thing.
I'll ask your question. Yeah.
Feel free to use the chat and we can go to somebody else while you're doing that.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
But yeah.
Oh, Mary. Oh, Mary, you're still on mute though. There you go.
Rachel, I've been to both of your sessions now, and I just want to thank you. And I appreciate your sharing. And somehow I have a tremendous respect for your spirituality. And our church is beginning the program of Sacred Ground, in which white people will be looking at their own issues. And I wondered if you would pray for us. We will be working from October through June of this coming year.
Okay.
And if you would just, when it comes to your mind and your heart, if you would say a word for us, I would appreciate that.
I'd be honored to carry that in prayer. Yeah, definitely. And I respect the work that you're doing, and, you know, raise my hands, give kudos to you for doing that.
I think we're, are there any more before Jenny's question? Darren.
I'd like to elaborate a little more on something I noticed. I think you were saying in Ojibwe, there's the idea that angry spirits or evil spirits, I'm not sure what, I don't remember the words, but they can kind of mess with the living. Are there established ideas about the ancestors positively influencing the living?
Oh yeah, yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah, there's the ones who sort of have made their journey because they lived in a good way. They can definitely still positively affect your life, and the ones who caused you problems and caused problems on earth in their life and never amended that life, they can still cause problems in the afterlife if they kind of, you know, where they weren't able to make their journey because they never made a good way journey on earth and in their life. So they're never going to make a good way journey to the next world. So you can still blame your cousin for stuff even after they die.
We do need to start wrapping up, but I see Jenny's question. She says, you say that your spirit comes to the world with gifts. Any sense of what ancestors are doing as they journey on?
Well, in my own personal experience, when I was very little, like still in the crib little, I had the experience of my mother's father, so my native grandfather, being present to me. And when later on, I was probably about 8 or 9, and I saw a photo of him for the first time in my grandmother's house, I knew who that was. And I said, he was with me, protecting me. So I personally have had the experience of feeling as though, you know, my ancestors were with me, protecting me and guiding me, and loving me. And then in the time when I happened to be with my father when he died very unexpectedly, and I very clearly in the moment, I knew exactly when he died, the moment that he died and his spirit left him, because I had this profound experience of him, of his mother meeting him, of coming back for him. That was just extremely comforting to me.
Thank you, Rachel. I think that's a good place to stop because I believe you have a ferry to catch, don't you?
I do. I'm on the mainland in Everett and I need to go back to my island.
Right.
Get there on the 9, I have to wait till 10.
So Rachel, I want to thank you so much for being with us. first of all.
Thank you.
And especially for those who are guests tonight, this is the time of our Wednesday evening when we shift over and do the Episcopal service of Compline, which is the bedtime prayers of the church. You are certainly welcome to stay and or participate to the degree that you choose to do so. Sometimes people get off the call at this point too, and so you're welcome to do that. But Rachel, just thank you so much for being with us and helping us to kick off this series.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor and a privilege, and I will definitely keep Mary and your community in my prayers in the important work that you're doing. And I just say, Miigwech, thank you, and I honor you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rachel. All right, bye. Okay, friends. As I often do on Wednesday nights, I want to ask whether there's somebody who is familiar with the Compline service and would feel confident in leading it tonight. I will put it up on the screen for those who want to share. And if nobody else steps up, I will. Oh, there's Carol. Okay, Carol, we'll have you lead Compline tonight. And I will now, I'm going to stop the recording. And thank you to all of those who are watching this on Facebook. Feel free to leave notes in the comments and we'll reply to those as able. Thanks.